watching from Hong Kong, and make sure to subscribe because the next story is one you can't miss. Move, you crooked judge. This courtroom isn't your church, and that bench doesn't make you better than us. Officer Mike Donnelly's fingers bit into Judge Patricia Reynolds' shoulder hard enough to twist her sideways as Officer Chris Baxter clamped down on the other, hauling her up from the bench in front of her own packed courtroom in the downtown Chicago courthouse. The cuffs clicked once, sharp and metallic, while Donnelly leaned close, his breath hot with coffee and contempt. "Let's see how much attitude you have without your little wooden hammer," he said, loud enough for every lawyer, clerk, and defendant to hear. Patricia's black robe bunched under their fists, her face calm even as the warrant Baxter waved shook with his own excitement. Around her, no one moved. Even the bailiff looked terrified to breathe. They thought they were parading a disgraced nobody out of court, never realizing they were laying hands on the one person who could bury them both. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe because the next story is one you can't miss. Sunlight filtered through the tall courthouse windows in the downtown Chicago courthouse, casting long shadows across the packed courtroom. Judge Patricia Reynolds sat behind her bench, her black robe crisp and her posture perfect. Her dark eyes scanned the sea of faces before her. Anxious defendants, stern officers, and attentive lawyers all waited for her ruling. The case had dragged on. Evidence of systematic unlawful detentions had piled up, painting a disturbing picture of police overreach. Now, the moment of judgment had arrived. "This court has reviewed extensive evidence of constitutional violations," Patricia began, her voice steady and clear. "The pattern of detaining citizens without probable cause shows a troubling disregard for basic rights." She paused, noting how several uniformed officers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Their discomfort did not deter her. Her experience on the bench had taught her that justice required courage. Furthermore, the department's claim that these detentions were necessary for public safety is not supported by the facts. The data shows a clear bias in how these stops were conducted, with minority communities bearing the brunt of this misconduct. A muscle twitched in the police captain's jaw. His face had grown increasingly red as she spoke. "Good. Let them squirm." The truth needed to be said. "The evidence demonstrates that officers regularly exceeded their authority, holding citizens without cause, denying them access to legal representation, and the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom crashed open with a bang that made everyone jump. Heads whipped around as officers Mike Donnelly and Chris Baxter stormed down the center aisle. Their boots echoed against the marble floor, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Patricia's heart quickened, but her face remained impassive. She had dealt with intimidation tactics before. "Officers, this court is in session. You will wait." "Save it," Donnelly sneered, his voice carrying through the now silent room. He was a big man, using his size to project menace as he approached the bench. Baxter moved beside him, smaller but somehow more threatening in his cold calculation. The bailiff stepped forward uncertainly. "Officers, you can't, we can, and we will," Baxter cut him off, pulling out a folded paper. "We have business here." Patricia's hands gripped the edge of her bench. "Whatever business you have can wait until this court." "Your court?" Donnelly's laugh was ugly. "That's rich. You do not get to hide behind that robe anymore, Your Honor." He spat the title like an insult. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Lawyers exchanged worried glances. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype, eyes wide with disbelief. "Officer Donnelly," Patricia said, keeping her voice level despite the growing knot in her stomach, "you are interrupting official proceedings and showing contempt for contempt?" Donnelly's face twisted into a smirk. "That's funny coming from you. Stand up." "I will not." Patricia's words rang out firm and clear. "This is my courtroom, and you are out of line." "Not anymore." Baxter moved to her left while Donnelly took the right, their synchronized movements betraying careful planning. "Your courtroom days are done." The gallery erupted in whispers. A few people stood up for a better view, while others edged toward the exits. The air grew thick with tension. "What you are doing is illegal," Patricia stated, fighting to maintain her composure as they flanked her. "Step back now," or Donnelly's hand clamped down on her shoulder, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. On her other side, Baxter grabbed her arm with equal force. "Or what?" Donnelly sneered. "You will hold us in contempt? Issue a warrant? Those days are over, Judge. Time to see how the other side lives." The bailiff finally found his voice. "Stop! You can't—" "We can," Baxter said smoothly, his grip tightening. "We have full authority." Shocked gasps filled the room as they began pulling Patricia to her feet. Her robe twisted around her legs as she tried to maintain her dignity. The wooden bench scraped against the floor. "This is assault on a judge," someone called out. "Someone stop them!" But nobody moved. The other officers present stayed rooted in place, their faces carefully blank. The attorneys watched in stunned silence. Even the bailiff seemed paralyzed by the unprecedented scene unfolding before him. Patricia's mind raced. This was coordinated, planned, not a rogue action, but something worse. An approved attack on judicial authority itself. She could feel the tremors of fear trying to take hold, but she refused to let them show. "Get your hands off me," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of her experience on the bench. "This is a direct violation of save your speeches," Donnelly growled, yanking her harder. "You are coming with us, and all your fancy words will not change that." The gallery erupted in chaos. People were standing now, phones raised to record the scene. The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, capturing every word. But no one intervened as the officers manhandled a sitting judge in her own courtroom. Patricia's feet barely touched the ground as they lifted her partly out of her chair. Her robe bunched awkwardly around her waist, but she kept her chin high. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear, even as her heart pounded against her ribs. "Look at her now," Donnelly announced to the room, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Not so high and mighty without that bench to hide behind, are you?" The heavy silence shattered as Donnelly jerked Patricia fully to her feet. Her robe twisted around her legs, the fabric bunching awkwardly as she struggled to maintain her balance. Papers scattered from her bench, floating to the floor like broken wings. "Patricia Reynolds," Donnelly announced, his voice booming through the stunned courtroom. "You are under arrest for judicial obstruction and tampering with evidence." His lips curled into a satisfied sneer. "Guess you are not untouchable after all." A wave of shocked whispers rippled through the gallery. Phones raised higher, recording every moment of the unprecedented scene. The bailiff took another hesitant step forward, his hand hovering near his belt. "This is completely irregular," Patricia stated, her voice steady despite the bruising grip on her arms. "I demand to see your warrant immediately." Baxter pulled a folded document from his jacket with his free hand, making a show of waving it in front of her face. "Right here, Your Honor." The mockery in his tone matched his partner's. "All nice and legal." "Read it," Patricia commanded, refusing to flinch as Donnelly's fingers dug deeper into her shoulder. "Oh, now you want to play by the rules?" Donnelly laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. He shook her slightly, like a dog with a toy. "Where was that respect for procedure when you were throwing out our cases?" At her stenotype machine, Rachel Bennett's experienced fingers never stopped moving, recording every word of the unfolding drama. Her eyes narrowed as she caught glimpses of the warrant Baxter held. Something about the formatting looked wrong. The header was not aligned properly, and the case number sequence seemed off. "I need to examine that document." The court clerk finally spoke up, finding her voice. She stepped forward, hand extended. "Sure thing," Baxter replied smoothly, holding out the warrant. But as the clerk reached for it, he pulled it back slightly. "Just remember, interfering with a lawful arrest is a serious offense." The clerk's hand wavered, uncertainty crossing her face. She glanced at the bailiff, who looked equally conflicted. Years of conditioning to respect police authority warred with their duty to protect the court's integrity. "The warrant is fraudulent," Patricia stated firmly, her dark eyes scanning what she could see of the document. "The formatting alone violates standard procedure, and the case number sequence is incorrect." "Shut up," Donnelly growled, giving her another rough shake. "You do not give the orders anymore." Rachel's fingers flew faster across her keys, capturing every word. She knew the importance of creating an accurate record, especially now. Her eyes caught more details, missing watermarks, irregular signatures. But before she could speak up, Donnelly escalated. "That is enough talk," he announced. "Hands behind your back, Judge. Time to see how the other half lives." "This is assault on a judicial officer," Patricia stated clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Everyone present is witnessing a criminal act," Donnelly responded by wrenching her arms backward, making her gasp involuntarily. "Still trying to lecture us? Maybe these will help you understand your new position." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom. "Stop this immediately." A senior attorney stood up from the gallery. "This is completely inappropriate." "Sit down," Baxter barked, his hand moving meaningfully to his weapon. "Unless you want to join her." The attorney sank back slowly, face flushed with shame. Others in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, averting their eyes from the spectacle before them. The weight of collective cowardice hung heavy in the air. The cold steel closed around Patricia's wrists, digging into her skin. Her judicial robe bunched awkwardly behind her, the symbol of her authority now twisted and constrained. Still, she kept her head high, her voice steady. "Every person in this room," she proclaimed, meeting as many eyes as she could, "has a duty to report what they are witnessing. This is a direct attack on judicial independence." "Keep talking," Donnelly sneered, yanking the chain so her shoulders strained. "It will make great evidence at your trial." Rachel's fingers never stopped moving, capturing every word, every grunt, every rattle of the handcuffs. Her machine would remember what human courage had failed to confront. "The warrant." The clerk tried one more time, her voice smaller now. "We need to verify." "Here's your verification," Baxter cut her off, slapping the document onto her desk. "File it properly, unless you want us coming back for you next." The clerk's hands shook as she picked up the warrant, her eyes skimming the obvious irregularities, but her mouth staying firmly shut. Self-preservation won out over duty. "Start walking," Donnelly commanded, shoving Patricia forward. Her robe dragged on the ground, the hem catching under her feet. "Let us give everyone a good look at what happens to judges who do not know their place." Patricia stumbled slightly but caught herself, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall. As they marched her toward the exit, she held her posture straight, her face composed. The gallery parted before them, people pressing back against the benches, as if corruption might be contagious. "Remember this moment," she said clearly, her words cutting through the tense silence. "Remember what you saw, what you heard, and what you failed to stop." "Always with the speeches," Donnelly muttered, shoving her harder. "Keep moving." The handcuffs bit deeper as they forced her forward, her steps measured despite their pushing. In the space of minutes, they had stripped away her authority, her dignity, her freedom. But they could not take her composure, her truth, or her determination. With phones still recording and Rachel's stenotype still clicking, they dragged Judge Patricia Reynolds toward the courtroom doors, leaving behind a room full of witnesses who would have to live with their silence. Rachel's fingers remained frozen over her stenotype as the heavy doors swung shut behind Judge Reynolds. The echo seemed to linger, like the final gong of a bell marking the end of something sacred. Through her career as a court reporter, she documented thousands of cases, but never had she witnessed such a blatant violation of judicial authority. Her eyes dropped to her notes, scanning the details she had captured about the warrant. The filing codes jumped out at her immediately. She had processed enough court documents to recognize the inconsistencies. The prefix was wrong for their jurisdiction, and the numerical sequence did not match the standard format used for judicial warrants. Even the date stamps were misaligned. "Back to work, everyone," the clerk announced weakly, shuffling papers on her desk without actually looking at them. "We have other cases on the docket." But nobody moved. The gallery remained frozen, witnesses to a crime they had done nothing to stop. Lawyers whispered in clusters, their faces drawn with concern, or was it fear? The bailiff stood rigid by his post, staring straight ahead as if trying to convince himself he had not just watched two officers assault a judge. Rachel's fingers moved mechanically over her keys, adding more observations to her record. Her experience could not be interrupted, even by shock. She noted the exact words used, the physical handling that went beyond any reasonable force needed for a legitimate arrest. Through the glass panels of the courtroom doors, she could see the growing crowd in the hallway. Court staff and attorneys gathered in small groups, their heads bent together in urgent conversation. Phones were out, no doubt spreading the news across social media already. Judge Reynolds' arrest would be viral before she even reached the police station. But something else caught Rachel's attention. Standing near the back wall, partially hidden by a support column, Chief Edward Harlan observed the aftermath with cold calculation. His presence sent a chill down her spine. He had not moved during the entire incident, had not tried to stop his officers, had not shown any surprise at their actions. His face remained impassive, but his eyes held satisfaction. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This was not a random act of police intimidation. The warrant's obvious flaws, the arrest, the chief's presence, it was orchestrated, planned. Someone wanted Judge Reynolds not just arrested but humiliated in her own courtroom. "Ms. Bennett," the clerk's voice startled her. "We will need a copy of the transcript as soon as possible." Rachel nodded slowly, her hand steady despite the tremors in her chest. Of course, I will have it prepared. She didn't mention the irregularities she had documented. The clerk's earlier silence told her everything she needed to know about where loyalties would fall. Around her, court staff began moving with exaggerated normalcy, as if trying to erase what they had witnessed through sheer force of routine. Files were shuffled, calendars consulted, phones answered, but their movements had a mechanical quality, like actors who had forgotten their true roles. Through the doors, she could still see Chief Harlan. He had moved slightly, now speaking quietly with another officer. Their expressions were too controlled, too satisfied. Rachel's fingers added another note to her record. Chief Edward Harlan present during entire incident. No intervention attempted. She watched as he finally turned to leave, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. The sound carried authority, control, power. It was the sound of a man who knew his plans were unfolding exactly as intended. The nausea rose in Rachel's throat. She had seen enough corruption in her career to recognize its patterns, the careful orchestration, the public humiliation, the silent witnesses. It was all designed to send a message. Judge Reynolds's true crime was not whatever that fraudulent warrant claimed. It was daring to challenge police power from her bench. We should probably clear the courtroom, the clerk announced, her voice still shaky. Given the circumstances. The gallery began to empty, people filing out in uncomfortable silence. Some still had their phones out, replaying their recordings of the arrest. Others simply looked shell-shocked, as if they could not quite believe what they had witnessed in a place meant to represent justice. Rachel's hands moved with practiced efficiency, saving her notes and creating multiple backup files. Each keystroke felt like an act of defiance, preserving truth while others tried to bury it. She noted how Officer Donnelly had grabbed the judge's left shoulder first, how Officer Baxter had positioned himself to block the bailiff's path, how the warrant had been deliberately kept just out of clear view. Details mattered. Details could be the difference between justice and its perversion. With methodical care, she removed her backup drive and slipped it into her purse. Her primary files would go to official storage, but these copies, these would stay with her. She locked her stenotype case with slow, deliberate movements, each click of the latches echoing in the nearly empty courtroom. Rising from her station, Rachel gathered her belongings with the same efficiency she had demonstrated for decades. But inside, her mind was racing. She knew what she had seen. She knew what she had documented. And she knew with absolute certainty that this was bigger than a single corrupt arrest. Looking around the courtroom one last time, she saw the scattered papers still lying where they had fallen during the arrest. The judge's bench stood empty, the gavel abandoned mid-use. Everything about the scene felt wrong, distorted, like a painting that had been violently slashed. But Rachel had her records. Her fingers had captured every word, every action, every detail that others might conveniently forget. She held truth in her files, and no amount of power or intimidation could erase what she had documented. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the Chicago police station's processing area, casting harsh shadows across Patricia's face. Her judicial robe had been taken, leaving her in the simple black dress she had worn underneath. 4 officers stood watching, their badges gleaming under the artificial light, as if to mock everything her own position once represented. "Hands on the counter." Officer Donnelly's voice carried a smug satisfaction that made her stomach turn. When she didn't move fast enough, he stepped closer. "I said, hands on the counter, Judge." He spat out her title like it was poison. Patricia placed her palms flat on the cold metal surface, her movements deliberate and controlled. She had sentenced countless criminals from her bench, but now found herself on the other side of the system she had served. The irony was not lost on her. "Name." Officer Baxter stood at the computer, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. His tone was professional, almost bored, as if processing a judge was just another task. "You know my name," Patricia replied, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. Donnelly slammed his hand down beside hers, making the counter rattle. "Answer the question properly. You are not giving orders anymore." "Judge Patricia Marie Reynolds," she said, each word precise and clear. She noticed how Donnelly's jaw clenched at her use of her title. Good. The processing continued with mechanical efficiency. Date of birth. Address. Employment, each question designed to reduce her to data points in their system. Baxter typed everything with methodical precision, while Donnelly hovered too close, invading her space with his bulk. Fingerprints next. Baxter announced, rolling his chair toward the fingerprinting station. Right hand first. Patricia watched as they pressed each of her fingers into the black ink pad. The substance felt oily against her skin, leaving marks that would stain long after they were done. She memorized every detail. Officer Johnson manning the camera, Officer Garcia by the door, the slight tremor in Baxter's left hand as he worked. "Make sure you get good prints," Donnelly instructed, his breath hot against her ear. "Would not want any mistakes in processing our high and mighty judge." "Step back, Officer Donnelly," Patricia said quietly. "Your intimidation tactics are unnecessary and unprofessional." He laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Still trying to give orders? Maybe you have not noticed, but that robe does not protect you anymore. You are just another perp now." Baxter finished with her fingers and gestured toward the height chart on the wall. "Stand against the wall for your photo." Patricia walked to the marked spot, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. She held her head high as Officer Johnson adjusted the camera. The flash burned her eyes, but she did not blink. Click. "Turn left." Click. "Turn right." Click. Each photo documenting this orchestrated humiliation. "Smile for your mugshot," Donnelly taunted. "I'm thinking of framing this one for my desk." Patricia stared directly into the camera, her expression neutral, but her eyes blazing with defiance. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Let them take their photos. Let them fill out their forms. Every procedure they followed, every regulation they ignored, it was all evidence she stored away in her mind. "Personal items," Baxter called out, holding up a plastic bag. "Jewelry, watch, anything in your pockets." With steady hands, Patricia removed her pearl earrings, a gift from her mother when she had first been appointed to the bench. Her wedding ring, worn even years after her husband's death, the simple gold watch she had used to keep time in her courtroom. Each item dropped into the bag with a small clink, like pieces of her identity being stripped away. "Check her for weapons," Donnelly ordered, though they all knew it was unnecessary. She had gone through courthouse security, had been sitting on her bench when they arrested her. Officer Garcia stepped forward, a female officer at least, and performed the pat-down with professional detachment. Patricia stood still, noting how Donnelly watched with undisguised satisfaction. "She is clean," Garcia reported, stepping back. "Of course she is," Donnelly sneered. "Judges do not get their hands dirty, do they? They just sit up high and pass judgment on real workers." Patricia met his gaze. "Is there something you would like to say directly, Officer Donnelly, rather than these thinly veiled implications?" His face reddened. "Yeah, I got something to say. You have been a thorn in this department's side for too long. All those cases you ruled against us, all those times you took some scumbag's word over a cop's. Well, look where that got you." "Are you admitting this arrest is retaliation for my judicial decisions?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying the same calm authority she had used in court. "Enough talking," Baxter cut in quickly, shooting Donnelly a warning look. "Processing is complete. Time for holding." They led her down a narrow corridor, past rows of cells. Some were empty. Others held occupied forms hunched on metal benches. The air grew colder, heavy with the smell of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. Baxter unlocked a cell door while Donnelly kept his hand clamped on Patricia's arm. The space was small, with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a stainless steel toilet in the corner. No privacy, no comfort, designed to remind occupants of their powerlessness. "Welcome to your new chambers," Donnelly said, shoving her forward into the cell. "Hope it meets your honor's high standards." Patricia caught herself against the bench, refusing to stumble. She turned to face them as the door swung shut with a heavy clang, the sound echoing off concrete walls. The lock engaged with a final definitive click. The holding cell's metal bench pressed cold against Patricia's back. She sat perfectly straight, her posture a habit from her time on the bench, even as her mind raced through the events. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting stark shadows across the concrete floor. Every detail of the arrest played on repeat in her thoughts. Donnelly's thundering entrance, Baxter's calculated movements, the warrant that should not exist. Her fingers traced the lingering stains from the fingerprint ink, dark smudges that marked her transformation from judge to defendant. The sound of voices echoed down the corridor, growing louder. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the jangle of keys. "You cannot deny her legal representation," a familiar voice boomed. "I do not care what internal procedures you are claiming." David Whitaker. Patricia felt a small measure of relief at the sound of her old colleague's voice. He had always been a force of nature in the courtroom, and his presence now carried that same intensity. The guard grumbled that was all he could allow for now. David Whitaker appeared at the cell door, his usual impeccable suit slightly rumpled, suggesting he had rushed over. His dark eyes swept the cell, taking in every detail before settling on Patricia. The guard unlocked the door, and David Whitaker stepped inside. "They are saying you tampered with evidence," David Whitaker said without preamble, his voice low and controlled. "Judicial obstruction. The media is already running with it." "The warrant was invalid," Patricia replied, keeping her voice steady. "The filing numbers did not match any legitimate court documents. Rachel Bennett, my court reporter, noticed it immediately." David Whitaker pulled out a small notebook, his pen moving quickly across the page. "Take me through it. Everything. From the beginning." "I was delivering my ruling on the Thompson case, police misconduct, unlawful detention patterns." Patricia closed her eyes, reconstructing the scene. Mid-sentence, Donnelly and Baxter burst in. No warning, no proper procedure. They claimed to have a warrant, but David, she leaned forward slightly, that warrant should not exist. There was no investigation, no probable cause. "They are claiming otherwise," David Whitaker said, still writing. "Chief Harlan gave a statement. Says they have been building a case against you, accusing you of systematically favoring defendants in police misconduct cases, suggesting you have been tampering with evidence to support your rulings." Patricia's jaw tightened. Harlan was there in the courtroom. He watched it happen. He knew. Of course he did. David Whitaker stopped writing, meeting her eyes. "This is not just about the ruling, is it? This is about every case where you have stood up to department overreach. Every time you have ruled against them, they are trying to discredit your entire record." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the small window in the cell door, they could see officers gathering around a break room television. The news was running footage of Patricia being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. "Breaking news," the reporter's voice carried faintly down the hallway. "Sources within the department suggest Judge Reynolds has shown increasingly erratic behavior, with multiple complaints filed regarding her conduct." "They are not wasting any time," David Whitaker muttered, scribbling faster in his notebook. "They are painting you as unstable, biased, corrupt, classic character assassination." "They have been planning this," Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The warrant, the media narrative, all of it. This is not impulsive. This is coordinated." David Whitaker nodded grimly. "The question is how far up it goes. Harlan is involved, obviously, but an operation this sophisticated." He trailed off, adding more notes. The guard called, rattling his keys. David Whitaker stood, straightening his tie. "I'm going to start digging. First priority is getting you out of here. Then we will start dismantling their story piece by piece." He paused, studying her face. "You know they are not going to make this easy." "They never have," Patricia replied. She thought of all the times she had stood firm against police overreach, all the cases where she had insisted on accountability. Each ruling had earned her enemies, created ripples through the department. Now those ripples had become a wave, crashing down on her with full force. "David," she said, as he turned to leave. "Rachel Bennett, find her. She saw everything, and she will have records." He nodded sharply. "I will start there. Hang tight, Patricia. This is just the beginning." The cell door clanged shut behind him, the sound reverberating off the concrete walls. Through the window, Patricia could still see the television screen, now showing her official judicial portrait alongside sensational headlines, questioning her mental state and integrity. She watched the officers in the break room, their backs to her cell, nodding along with the news report. How many of them had appeared in her courtroom? How many had she ruled against when evidence showed misconduct? How many had waited for this moment? The realization settled over her like a physical weight. This was not just about defending herself against false charges. This was not even about exposing a corrupt arrest. This was about confronting an entire system that had finally shown its true face, a system that would rather destroy a judge than face accountability. Patricia straightened her spine, her hands folded in her lap, just as they had been countless times on the bench. Let them think they had her cornered. Let them believe their badges and guns and media connections made them untouchable. She had spent her career upholding justice in the face of power. She would not stop now, even from inside a cell. Sunlight filtered through the police station's windows as news broadcasts flickered across every available screen. Footage of Patricia's arrest played on an endless loop, each replay more sensational than the last. The cameras had caught her being led down the courthouse steps, her judicial robes disheveled, handcuffs glinting in the light. "Shocking developments," the anchor's voice rang through the break room, as Judge Patricia Reynolds was arrested in her own courtroom on charges of judicial misconduct and evidence tampering. Officers gathered around the television, some smirking, others nodding in apparent vindication. The footage cut to Chief Edward Harlan standing at a hastily assembled podium outside police headquarters. His silver hair caught the light, his uniform pressed and medals gleaming. "The department takes these allegations very seriously," Harlan declared, his voice carrying the practiced gravity of authority. "We have been monitoring Judge Reynolds' concerning pattern of behavior. The evidence suggests a systematic bias against law enforcement, coupled with actions that compromise the integrity of our justice system." In her cramped office at the courthouse, Rachel Bennett watched the same broadcast, her hands clenched into fists. She had served as a court reporter, recording every word, every objection, every ruling. Now she watched as they twisted Patricia's record into something unrecognizable. "Sources close to the investigation," another reporter intoned, "suggest Judge Reynolds has demonstrated increasingly erratic behavior, particularly in cases involving police conduct. Multiple officers have reportedly filed complaints about hostile treatment in her courtroom." Rachel's jaw tightened. She had been present for every one of those cases. Patricia had not been hostile. She had been thorough, demanding evidence to support testimony, refusing to accept badge numbers as automatic proof of truth. Across town at the Cook County Records Office, David Whitaker faced another wall of resistance. "I'm sorry, sir," the clerk said, not looking particularly sorry at all. "Those files are currently under review, administrative hold." "Under whose authority?" David Whitaker demanded, his tie loosened after similar roadblocks. "Direct order from the police department. Ongoing investigation." The clerk shuffled papers, clearly dismissing him. David Whitaker's phone buzzed, another news alert. He pulled it out to see Chief Harlan giving another statement, this time flanked by Officers Donnelly and Baxter. "Officers Donnelly and Baxter demonstrated tremendous courage today," Harlan was saying, resting a paternal hand on each officer's shoulder. "They put their duty to justice above professional courtesy. No one, regardless of their position, is above the law." Donnelly nodded solemnly, playing the role of reluctant hero. Baxter maintained his usual controlled expression, but David Whitaker caught the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. Back in her office, Rachel switched off the television, unable to watch anymore. The narrative was being crafted with surgical precision, each broadcast adding another layer of doubt about Patricia's character, her competence, her judgment. They were erasing principled rulings, replacing them with implications of instability and bias. She opened her bottom desk drawer, pulling out her personal stenographer's notebook. Unlike the official court records, which were already being reviewed, these pages contained her own detailed notes. Every session, every ruling, every interaction documented in her precise shorthand. Her fingers traced the entry, the warrant number that did not match any legitimate filing, the sequence of events, the words Donnelly had sneered as they grabbed Patricia, details that were already being altered or omitted in official accounts. Another news alert chimed from her computer. A local station had dug up an old complaint filed against Patricia by a police union representative, presenting it as evidence of a long-standing vendetta against law enforcement. They conveniently omitted that the complaint had been dismissed as baseless after investigation. Rachel thought of all the times she had watched Patricia work, methodically examining evidence, carefully weighing testimony, insisting on proper procedure even when it was inconvenient. She had seen Patricia rule in favor of officers when evidence supported their actions and against them when it did not. That was not bias. It was justice. Now they were trying to erase that record, replace it with their own version. Already social media was filling with selectively edited clips of Patricia's aggressive questioning of police witnesses. Comment sections overflowed with people questioning how such an obviously unstable person had been allowed to serve as a judge. Rachel finally stood. Gathering her belongings, she slipped her notebook into her bag along with several backup drives containing her digital records. As she walked through the courthouse halls, screens everywhere continued to broadcast the department's narrative. Legal experts questioned Judge Reynolds' fitness for the bench. Pattern of antagonistic behavior toward law enforcement. Sources suggest possible personal grievances influencing judicial decisions. Rachel clutched her bag closer, feeling the weight of her records inside. She had spent her career observing, recording, remaining neutral. But neutrality, she realized, was not the same as silence. Not when the truth itself was under attack. In her car, she placed her bag carefully on the passenger seat. Through the windshield, she could see the courthouse windows glowing with the same news broadcasts, the same carefully crafted story playing over and over. But in her notebooks and drives, a different story waited. The real story, documented word by word, day by day. They might control the airwaves, but they could not erase every record. Not as long as someone remembered the truth, not as long as someone was willing to protect it. Darkness settled over the city of Chicago as David Whitaker sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of case files. His tie hung loose around his neck, and empty coffee cups littered the surface between mountains of paperwork. "There has to be more here," he muttered, flipping through another ruling. His eyes burned from reading, but something kept nagging at him. A pattern just below the surface. He grabbed a legal pad and started making notes. Cases involving officers Donnelly and Baxter kept appearing. At first glance, they seemed random, spread across different incidents. But as David Whitaker charted them, a clearer picture emerged. Patricia had ruled against Donnelly in an excessive force complaint demanding he undergo additional training. She questioned Baxter's testimony in a drug possession case, ultimately throwing out evidence due to procedural violations. Both officers had been involved in a controversial arrest where Patricia ordered an internal investigation. David Whitaker circled connections, drew connecting lines. Each ruling showed Patricia's characteristic thoroughness, detailed analysis, careful consideration of evidence. But they also showed something else, a consistent refusal to accept police testimony without supporting proof. "This is not bias," David Whitaker said to himself, standing to pace his office. "This is accountability." His phone buzzed. A text from Rachel Bennett. "Found something. Need to talk." Across town, Rachel sat at her kitchen table in her Chicago neighborhood. Official court transcripts spread before her. Her personal notebooks lay open beside them, filled with her precise shorthand. A small desk lamp cast just enough light to work by leaving the rest of her apartment in shadows. She had been comparing records, and the differences were stark. The official transcript of the arrest had already been altered. Subtle changes in wording, omitted exchanges, but her personal notes captured everything. Donnelly's exact words when they entered. "Time to learn your place, Your Honor." The official record changed it to, "Please step down, Your Honor." The warrant number Baxter had presented KP 47891, a number that, according to her experience, did not match any legitimate court filing system. Her phone rang. David Whitaker. "Tell me what you found," he said without preamble. "They are sanitizing the record," Rachel replied, her voice tight. "I'm looking at the official transcript right now. They have already changed key details about the arrest. Can you prove the differences?" "I have my original notes and," she hesitated, "I have been keeping separate records, audio backups. It is not exactly protocol, but after seeing things disappear." "We need those records," David Whitaker said. "All of them. I'm finding patterns in Patricia's rulings that might explain why they targeted her." "The Donnelly and Baxter cases? You notice those too?" "I have recorded every one of their appearances in her courtroom. Their behavior was always aggressive, especially after she started requiring body cam footage to support their testimony." David Whitaker grabbed a fresh legal pad. "Tell me everything you remember about their cases." They pieced together the events. Rachel's perfect recall filled in crucial details. The growing tension in Donnelly's voice each time Patricia questioned him. Baxter's subtle attempts to intimidate witnesses. The increasing frequency of their appearances in cases that seemed designed to test Patricia's responses. It was not just random, David Whitaker realized. They were building a narrative, creating a record they could use against her. "But why now?" Rachel asked. "Why make their move?" David Whitaker shuffled through his files until he found what he was looking for. A pending case summary. Because she was scheduled to hear evidence in a class action lawsuit. Multiple plaintiffs claiming systematic abuse of power by specific officers within the department. Let me guess, Donnelly and Baxter? Among others. But here is what is interesting. The case file lists Chief Harlan as having direct oversight during the period in question. Rachel's sharp intake of breath carried clearly over the phone. That explains his presence in the courtroom. He was watching to make sure it happened. David Whitaker needed to call her. "This goes deeper than we thought. Be careful," Rachel warned. "They will be monitoring everything." "I know. But she needs to understand what we are dealing with." He dialed the detention center's number, went through the verification process, and waited while they connected him to Patricia's cell. "David?" Her voice was tired but steady. "I have been reviewing your cases," he said, carefully aware of the recording system, "particularly those involving our friends from this morning." "I assumed you would." "This was not spontaneous, Patricia. They have been laying groundwork. Every time you demanded evidence, every time you questioned testimony, every time you insisted on proper procedure, they were building their case to remove me before the class action hearing," she finished. "I'd wondered about the timing. It is bigger than that. The pattern of cases, the altered records, the involvement of senior officials. This is not just about stopping one lawsuit. I think we have stumbled onto something systematic, something they are desperate to keep hidden." Silence stretched for a moment. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was low but determined. "Then we need to expose it all. Not just clear my name, but bring everything into the light. It will be dangerous," David Whitaker warned. "They are already controlling the narrative, manipulating records." "But they cannot control everything," Patricia said. "And they have made one serious miscalculation." "What is that?" "They thought arresting me would silence me. Instead, they have given me nothing but time to think about every case, every detail, every connection." "And David?" "Yes, I remember everything." The line clicked. Their allotted time was up. David Whitaker sat back in his chair, surrounded by files and notes. Evidence of corruption spread across his desk. He thought of Rachel's secret records, Patricia's perfect memory, his own growing file of connections. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as two investigators led Patricia into the sterile interrogation room. Her orange jumpsuit felt coarse against her skin, a deliberate reminder of her new status. The metal chair scraped against concrete as she sat down, her handcuffs clinking against the table. Investigator Megan Foster, a sharp-featured woman, placed a thick folder on the table. Her partner, Detective Tom Riley, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, leaned against the wall behind Patricia. "Judge Reynolds," Foster began, her tone professionally cold. "Or should I just say Ms. Reynolds now?" Patricia's face remained neutral. "Judge Reynolds is still correct, investigator. Administrative leave does not change my title." Riley snorted. "Pretty sure getting arrested in your own courtroom changes things." "Being arrested under false pretenses does not change facts either," Patricia replied evenly. She sat straight-backed, hands folded on the table, as composed as if she were still on the bench. Foster opened the folder, spreading out documents. "Let us talk about your pattern of anti-police bias. You have ruled against department testimony in 70% of contested cases. I ruled based on evidence," Patricia corrected. "Or more accurately, the lack thereof. Would you like me to cite specific cases? How about the Thompson arrest?" Riley pushed off the wall, towering over her. "Officers Donnelly and Baxter provided clear testimony. They provided testimony that contradicted their own body camera footage," Patricia cut in. "Page 37 of my ruling details the 16 discrepancies. Would you like me to enumerate them?" Foster slapped another document down. "You have consistently undermined police credibility. I've consistently required evidence beyond verbal testimony," Patricia said. "The same standard I apply to all witnesses. The law does not grant special privileges to officers of the court." Across town, David Whitaker stood at a courthouse counter, frustration evident in his tight jaw. The clerk, a young man who could not meet his eyes, kept shaking his head. "What do you mean you cannot locate the Thompson case files?" David Whitaker demanded. "They were just used in court." "System shows they are checked out for review," the clerk mumbled. "By whom? I'm not authorized to provide that information." David Whitaker pulled out another form. "Fine. The warrant from the arrest. I need to verify the filing number. That is also unavailable." "Of course it is." David Whitaker's voice dripped sarcasm. "And Judge Reynolds' rulings?" The clerk's face reddened. "Currently being digitized." "All of them? Simultaneously?" David Whitaker leaned forward. "Look, I know you are just following orders, but someone is orchestrating this, and it is going to come out. Do you want to be on record as helping them?" The clerk glanced nervously at his supervisor's office before whispering, "Come back after the supervisor takes a late lunch. I will have time alone at the files. Meanwhile, in the courthouse transcription office, Rachel sat at her desk trying to focus on current cases while ignoring the whispers around her. Her colleagues gave her a wide berth, as if her proximity to the events might be contagious. Her supervisor appeared at her desk. "Rachel, let us talk about your workload." She looked up, noting his forced casual tone. "Is there a problem? Given recent events, we think it is best to reassign you from Judge Reynolds' cases. Administrative cleanup, you understand? All of them?" Rachel kept her voice steady. "We need someone uninvolved to review the records." "Uninvolved?" she repeated. "You mean someone who will not notice if things change?" The supervisor lowered his voice. "Do not make this difficult, Rachel. You are close to retirement. Would be ashamed to lose your pension over misplaced loyalty." Back in the interrogation room, Foster laid out photographs, surveillance shots of Patricia leaving the courthouse on various days. "You have had multiple meetings with known police reform activists," Foster accused. "I have had meetings with constituents, lawyers, and community leaders," Patricia corrected, "all properly documented and entirely appropriate for a judge handling public interest cases." Riley slammed his hand on the table. "You have been working to undermine this department." Patricia did not flinch. "I have been working to uphold the law. If that feels like undermining you, perhaps you should examine why. You really do not get it, do you?" Foster leaned forward. "This can go two ways. Admit to showing bias, agree to step down quietly, and this ends quickly. Or you will continue fabricating charges." Patricia met her gaze. "Tell me, investigator, does Officer Donnelly often provide you with falsified warrants? Or was the arrest special?" Riley grabbed Patricia's shoulder. "Listen here. Remove your hand," Patricia said quietly, "or explain to your superiors why you physically intimidated a judge during a recorded interview." Riley jerked back as if burned, glancing at the observation mirror. "Now," Patricia continued, "since you have nothing legitimate to charge me with, I would like to return to my cell. Unless you would care to explain why Chief Harlan ordered this arrest before the warrant was even generated." Foster's face tightened. "We are done here." She gathered her files quickly, avoiding eye contact. As guards led Patricia back through the cold corridors, she mentally cataloged every detail, every face, every document, every implied threat. The system she had served was now actively working to destroy her. Each locked door they passed, each guard who looked away, reinforced the reality of her situation. They reached her cell. The door clanged shut behind her, the sound echoing with finality. Patricia sat on the thin mattress, her back straight, her expression unchanged. Let them think they had her trapped. Let them believe the cell would break her spirit. They did not understand. Every false charge, every missing document, every attempt at intimidation, they were not just attacking her. They were proving her right, and she would remember all of it. David Whitaker's fingers drummed against his desk as the courthouse security footage played on his laptop. On screen, Officers Donnelly and Baxter entered through a side door, not the main entrance they had claimed in their report. "Got you," David Whitaker muttered, leaning closer. He watched as the officers huddled near the stairwell, checking their phones repeatedly. Their body language was tense, expectant, not the casual demeanor of officers responding to a sudden situation. The video showed Baxter answering a call before they burst into the courtroom. They had sworn under oath they had spent responding to an emergency tip about judicial misconduct. David Whitaker reached for his phone, dialing the public defender's office. "I need an emergency hearing. I've got footage that proves Officers Donnelly and Baxter lied about their timeline." He clicked through more footage as the public defender checked the court schedule. The camera angles caught Donnelly and Baxter moving with purpose, not urgency. They were not rushing to stop a crime in progress. They were executing a plan. The public defender said that was the best that could be done. He would take it. David Whitaker was already gathering his files. "Send me the confirmation." He drove straight to the detention center, requesting an immediate meeting with Patricia. The visitation room was cold and sterile, but Patricia entered with the same dignity she showed on the bench. Her orange jumpsuit could not diminish her presence. "I have something," David Whitaker said without preamble, spreading still frames from the footage across the table. They lied about why they were there. Patricia studied the images, her expression careful. The timestamp conflicts with their statement. They claimed they received an emergency tip about you destroying evidence. Said they rushed straight to the courtroom. David Whitaker tapped the photos. But here they are, earlier, clearly waiting for something. Or someone, Patricia added quietly. Notice how they keep checking their phones? They were waiting for a signal. David Whitaker nodded. I've got a hearing scheduled. Judge Susan Caldwell. A slight frown creased Patricia's brow. She is traditionally pro-law enforcement, but she is fair, David Whitaker countered, and she hates being lied to. These officers filed false statements under oath. That will matter to her. For the first time since her arrest, Patricia allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. It must have shone in her eyes because David Whitaker reached across the table, squeezing her hand briefly. "We are not done," he assured her. "I have got reporters asking questions now. People are noticing the inconsistencies." Outside the detention center, a small group of protesters had gathered. Their signs demanded justice, questioned the arrest. Local news vans idled nearby, cameras rolling as community leaders gave interviews. This arrest was a deliberate attempt to silence a voice of accountability. Reverend Michael Brooks told Channel 7 News, "Judge Reynolds has a long record of fairness. The timing of these charges, right as she was ruling on police misconduct, should concern every citizen." Social media buzzed with courthouse staff coming forward anonymously, describing the aggressive way the officers had stormed in. Legal experts questioned the validity of arresting a sitting judge during proceedings. The narrative was shifting, if only slightly. Back in his office, David Whitaker prepared his motion. The surveillance footage played on a loop on his second monitor as he typed. Each viewing revealed new details, the way Baxter kept looking toward the executive offices, how Donnelly positioned himself to be seen by specific cameras. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Check your email, sent you something interesting." David Whitaker opened his inbox to find audio files, recordings from the courtroom's backup system. He plugged in his headphones and listened. Behind the main audio track, barely audible, was Donnelly's voice, just before they grabbed Patricia. Right on schedule, David Whitaker added the audio files to his evidence list. The pieces were coming together, forming a picture of premeditation. But he knew from experience that evidence alone was not enough. They needed to shift public perception. He called in favors from journalist contacts, providing selected clips that highlighted the contradictions. Questions multiplied. Why were the officers there early? Who were they calling? Why did they not follow standard arrest protocols? The detention center brought Patricia a stack of messages from supporters. She read each one carefully, noting names, remembering faces from her courtroom. The system might be against her, but she was not alone. David Whitaker worked, refining his argument. The hearing would be brief. Preliminary hearings usually were, but it was their first real chance to challenge the arrest's legitimacy. He could not waste it. His phone lit up with a news alert. A local blog had published an interview with a courthouse janitor who overheard Donnelly and Baxter discussing taking care of the judge problem before the arrest. The story was gaining traction. David Whitaker rehearsed his presentation, anticipating counter-arguments. The surveillance footage played one final time, each damning frame another crack in the officer's story. His phone buzzed, a message from Judge Susan Caldwell's clerk confirming the hearing. David Whitaker gathered his files, checked his evidence one last time. They would have their first real chance to fight back. In her cell, Patricia lay awake, mentally reviewing everything that had happened. The hope she felt was cautious, tempered by experience, but it was there, growing stronger. The hearing would bring their first test, a chance to show that truth could still matter in a system designed to suppress it. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as David Whitaker set up his laptop at the defense table. Judge Susan Caldwell peered down from the bench, her face unreadable. Behind him, every seat was filled. Reporters, court staff, and curious onlookers packed shoulder to shoulder. Patricia sat beside David Whitaker, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the dark suits around her. She held her head high, but exhaustion shadowed her eyes after her time in detention. Officer Donnelly and Baxter lounged at the prosecution table, radiating smugness. District Attorney Frank Miller shuffled papers beside them, occasionally leaning over to whisper in Donnelly's ear. "Your Honor," David Whitaker began, standing, "we have surveillance footage that directly contradicts the officers' sworn statements about their actions prior to Judge Reynolds' arrest." Frank Miller shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense failed to properly submit this evidence through appropriate channels. We were not given adequate time to review. The footage was only obtained recently," David Whitaker countered, "given the circumstances." "Which does not negate proper procedure," Frank Miller interrupted. "Furthermore, we have serious concerns about chain of custody. This footage was not obtained through official channels." Judge Susan Caldwell frowned. "Mr. Whitaker, did you follow standard evidence submission protocols?" David Whitaker's jaw tightened. Given the constraints and the urgent nature, That is a no. Caldwell cut in. Motion to present surveillance footage is denied due to procedural non-compliance. Donnelly's smirk widened. Patricia's hands clasped tighter in her lap, but her expression remained neutral. Your Honor, David Whitaker pressed, the content of this footage proves premeditation. Counsel, I have made my ruling. Caldwell's tone was final. Move on. David Whitaker took a steadying breath. Then I would like to call Rachel Bennett, the court reporter present during Judge Reynolds' arrest. Rachel approached the stand, her steps measured. She had worn her best suit, her gray hair neatly pinned back. After being sworn in, she sat rigidly, hands folded. Ms. Bennett, please read from your transcript of the events immediately preceding Judge Reynolds' arrest, David Whitaker requested. Rachel opened the official transcript, then froze. Her eyes widened slightly as she scanned the page. This is not correct. What do you mean? David Whitaker asked. These are not my original notes. Rachel flipped through pages frantically. Several exchanges are missing. Frank Miller stood again. Your Honor, if the witness is suggesting tampering with official court documents, that is a serious allegation requiring proof. I kept my own records. Rachel began. Unofficial records have no standing. Frank Miller dismissed. The official transcript is the only admissible version. Judge Susan Caldwell nodded. The official transcript stands. Ms. Bennett, you are dismissed. Rachel's hands shook as she left the stand. In the gallery, several courthouse staff avoided her gaze. The prosecution calls Kevin Hayes, Frank Miller announced. A man in his 40s approached the stand. His suit was expensive, his manner confident. David Whitaker frowned. This witness had not been on any previous lists. Mr. Hayes, what is your occupation? Frank Miller asked. I am a court clerk in Judge Reynolds' division. And what did you witness before Judge Reynolds' arrest? Kevin Hayes leaned forward. I saw Judge Reynolds removing files from the evidence room. When she noticed me, she seemed startled and quickly left. Patricia stiffened. David Whitaker stood. Objection. This witness was not disclosed, due to concerns for his safety. Frank Miller smoothly interrupted. Mr. Hayes only came forward after receiving protective assurances. Judge Susan Caldwell overruled the objection. Kevin Hayes continued spinning his tale, describing multiple instances of suspicious behavior. Each detail was carefully crafted to seem plausible while being impossible to immediately disprove. She said the system needed correction. Kevin Hayes claimed that some evidence should not see the light of day. Patricia's face remained composed, but her fingers dug into her palms. She had never met this man, never had these conversations, but his performance was convincing, his lies wrapped in just enough truth to sound credible. After the testimony, Judge Susan Caldwell cleared her throat. Given the evidence presented, including testimony from a court officer witnessing suspicious behavior, I find probable cause to proceed with charges. She shuffled papers on her bench. Furthermore, in light of these serious allegations, I am issuing an immediate order for Judge Reynolds' removal from the bench pending full investigation. The gallery erupted in murmurs. David Whitaker started to object, but Caldwell raised her hand. My decision is final. Bailiff, please escort the defendant out. Patricia stood slowly, dignity intact despite the crushing weight of the moment. Her gaze swept the courtroom, past Donnelly's triumphant grin, past Kevin Hayes' satisfied smirk, past the shocked faces of colleagues she had worked with for years. She paused at the gallery gate, where her robe had once commanded respect. Now she stood exposed in detention orange, watching her service crumble under carefully constructed lies. The bailiff touched her elbow gently. Ma'am? Patricia nodded once and allowed herself to be led out. Her steps were steady, her head high, but each footfall felt like another nail in the coffin of her career. Behind her, Frank Miller was already speaking to reporters. This demonstrates that no one is above the law, he declared. The evidence speaks for itself. The heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind her, cutting off the voices, the whispers, the sound of justice being twisted. In the quiet hallway, Patricia finally allowed her shoulders to drop slightly, but her eyes remained clear, her jaw set. They had taken her robe, her position, her authority, but they had not taken her determination. Not yet. The bailiff gestured toward the detention area. Patricia straightened her spine and walked forward. Each step was an act of defiance, measured, deliberate, unbroken. David Whitaker slumped in his office chair, tie loosened, staring at the motion that had just been denied. The sun cast long shadows through the blinds, highlighting the scattered papers across his desk. His phone buzzed. Another reporter wanting comment on Patricia's removal from the bench. A soft knock at his door made him look up. Rachel Bennett stood in the doorway, clutching her worn leather bag like a shield. "Can I come in?" she asked, glancing nervously down the hallway. David Whitaker straightened. "Of course." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Close the door behind you." Rachel settled into the chair, her movements careful and deliberate. She placed her bag in her lap, hands still gripping the straps tightly. "I should not be here," she said quietly. "They are watching everyone who might help Judge Reynolds." I noticed that transcript swap was not subtle. David Whitaker's jaw tightened. They are not even trying to hide it anymore. Rachel took a deep breath. "That is why I came. There is something you need to know." She reached into her bag, removing an old digital recorder and several USB drives. "I have been keeping my own records." David Whitaker leaned forward. "What kind of records?" "Audio recordings, independent of the court system." Her fingers traced the recorder's worn edges. "When I started as a court reporter, I learned quickly that official transcripts could change, important details would vanish. So I started backing everything up." She placed the items on his desk. "I have recordings from every significant case in Judge Reynolds' courtroom, including the day of her arrest." David Whitaker stared at the devices, hardly daring to breathe. "These are unauthorized recordings." "Yes," Rachel's voice was firm despite her obvious nervousness. "But they are accurate, and they prove the official transcript was altered." David Whitaker picked up one of the drives. "How detailed are these recordings?" "Everything. The warrant numbers Donnelly and Baxter claimed, their exact words when they entered." She paused. "And conversations they did not know were being captured." "What do you mean?" "My equipment was still running after they cleared the courtroom. It picked up Donnelly bragging to Baxter about how they had finally shut her up." Rachel's hands trembled slightly. "They mentioned Chief Harlan by name. Said everything was going according to plan." David Whitaker grabbed a legal pad. "Tell me exactly what you heard. Word for word." As Rachel recounted the details, David Whitaker's pen flew across the page. The recording captured Donnelly and Baxter discussing the fake warrant numbers, laughing about how easy it was to alter documents when the chief had your back. They had even mentioned specific cases Patricia had ruled on, cases where evidence had mysteriously disappeared. "There is more," Rachel continued. "Remember Kevin Hayes, the surprise witness?" She pulled out another drive. "He has never worked in Judge Reynolds' division. I have records of staff meetings. He is not in a single one." David Whitaker's eyes widened. They planted a completely fake witness? They got sloppy. Rachel's voice hardened. They did not think anyone would have proof. David Whitaker began organizing the drives. "We will need to authenticate these recordings, prove they have not been tampered with." "I thought of that." Rachel pulled out a notebook filled with meticulous notes. "I have documented every recording, equipment used. The recorder itself has internal timestamps that cannot be altered, and I have the original memory cards stored separately." "You have been preparing for something like this?" "I have watched too many good people get crushed by this system." Her voice caught slightly. Judge Reynolds was different. She actually tried to fix things. That is why they came after her. David Whitaker stood, pacing as his mind raced through possibilities. "We will need expert witnesses to verify the audio, someone to confirm Kevin Hayes' employment records, and we have to move fast. They will try to block this evidence too." "I have copies," Rachel assured him. "Multiple copies stored in different places. They cannot make these disappear." David Whitaker paused, studying her. "You understand what you are risking? Your job, possibly criminal charges for unauthorized recording." "I understand." Rachel met his gaze steadily. "I've spent my career watching silently. Not anymore." David Whitaker nodded, respect evident in his expression. He pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Let us go through everything systematically. Start with the arrest day recordings. We need to document every inconsistency with the official transcript." Rachel opened her notebook. The first discrepancy appears before they entered. Donnelly's radio transmission proves he was already in the building, not responding to an emergency call like he claimed. They pieced together the truth the recordings revealed. Each detail strengthened the pattern of corruption. The warrant numbers were traceable to blank forms that had disappeared from evidence storage. Radio calls showed coordination with someone high in the department. Even the background conversations captured snippets of a larger conspiracy. "We need to be strategic about how we use this," David Whitaker said, reviewing his notes. "The moment they realize these recordings exist, they will throw everything they have at discrediting them." "Start with Kevin Hayes," Rachel suggested. "Proving he lied under oath would shake their whole case." David Whitaker nodded, making more notes. "Then the warrant discrepancies. Build momentum before we reveal the full scope." He looked up at Rachel. "Are you ready for what comes next? Once we file this evidence, there is no going back." Rachel squared her shoulders. "I have been ready. Let us get Judge Reynolds back on that bench." The office had grown dark, lit only by David Whitaker's desk lamp and the glow of his computer screen. Empty coffee cups littered his desk as he sat with headphones on, listening to Rachel's recordings. Donnelly's voice crackled through the audio. "Chief says she's been poking around those seized asset reports. Time to shut her down." Baxter's calmer tone followed. "Everything is arranged. Warrant is ready. Just needs the final touches." David Whitaker paused the playback, making another note on his legal pad. The conversation took place before they had stormed into Patricia's courtroom. Their claims of responding to an emergency complaint were falling apart with each replay. He pulled up financial records on his screen, cross-referencing. The seized asset reports Donnelly mentioned were not just random files. They connected to a series of drug busts where evidence had vanished, cases that had crossed Patricia's desk. "Follow the money," David Whitaker muttered, clicking through spreadsheets. Department records showed unusual patterns in asset forfeitures. Cars, cash, property, all logged, then mysteriously revalued or disappeared entirely. His phone buzzed. A text from his forensic accountant. "Found something. Check account. Vardu 847392. Multiple deposits coincide with dismissed cases." David Whitaker pulled up the account records. His eyes widened. Regular deposits always just under reporting thresholds, flowing into an offshore account. The names on the transfers were shell companies, but they aligned perfectly with cases Patricia had been investigating before her arrest, prompting David Whitaker to grab a fresh legal pad and draw connections between events. Patricia questions missing evidence in the Rodriguez case. A deposit appears in an offshore account. The Rodriguez case is mysteriously dismissed. Seized vehicles are accidentally released to unknown parties. The pattern repeated. Each instance involved cases Donnelly and Baxter had worked on, cases where Patricia had started asking uncomfortable questions. David Whitaker turned back to the audio. Later segments captured hallway conversations between the officers after the arrest. "She should have stayed in her lane," Donnelly's voice sneered. "Getting too close to the chief's special arrangements." "Keep it down," Baxter warned. "Just stick to the story. Judicial misconduct, tampering with evidence. Simple. Simple is good. Long as the paperwork holds up like you promised." David Whitaker's pen pressed hard against the paper as he transcribed. Their arrogance was stunning. They had not bothered checking for recording devices, confident in their power to control the narrative. He pulled out his phone, dialing his investigator. "I need everything you can find on Chief Harlan's financial records. Focus on any connections to these shell companies." He read off the account numbers. While waiting, David Whitaker reviewed Rachel's notes on the fake witness, Kevin Hayes. His employment records were a mess of contradictions. Signatures from supervisors who were not even working. They had fabricated his entire court security background. His computer chimed. New email from the investigator. David Whitaker clicked it open, scanning quickly. His breath caught. Chief Harlan had a pattern too, regular meetings with private security firms that won contracts after drug busts. Properties seized in raids ending up owned by companies linked to his brother-in-law. Everything carefully hidden behind layers of paperwork. But the connections were there, the pieces locked together. This was not just about silencing Patricia. She had stumbled onto an entire network of corruption with Harlan at the center. Donnelly and Baxter were merely enforcers, ensuring no one looked too closely at the money flowing through their department. As David Whitaker began organizing the evidence, financial trails revealing illegal profits from seized assets, audio proving the arrest was a planned act of retaliation, documented patterns of evidence tampering, proof of witness fabrication, and direct links between dismissed cases and suspicious deposits. His phone buzzed again. The investigator had more. Found property records. Chief's wife suddenly very wealthy. Multiple houses bought cash through LLCs. David Whitaker added it to his notes. The case was transforming. This was not just defending Patricia anymore. This was exposing systematic corruption at the highest levels. The courthouse would accept emergency filings. It had to be. Every moment Patricia spent stripped of her position was another moment they had to cover their tracks. David Whitaker began drafting the emergency motion, fingers flying across his keyboard. He detailed the new evidence, emphasizing the immediate need to address witness perjury and document falsification. The audio recordings provided clear probable cause for a broader investigation. He included just enough financial details to show the scale of corruption without revealing everything. Let them worry about what else he might have found. Their paranoia would work against them. David Whitaker gathered the files, double-checking his exhibits. The motion had to be perfect, no procedural errors they could use to delay things. He grabbed his coat, documents tucked securely in his briefcase. The night clerk would be expecting him. He had called ahead to ensure someone would be there to accept the filing. As he locked his office, David Whitaker thought of Patricia, still facing charges while corrupt officials walked free. That would end. The same system they had used to attack her would become the weapon that exposed their crimes. The elevator seemed painfully slow as it descended to the parking garage. David Whitaker mentally rehearsed his arguments, anticipating their counter-moves. They would try to block the recordings, claim privacy violations. He had precedents ready for every objection. Racing through empty streets toward the courthouse, David Whitaker allowed himself a grim smile. They thought they had silenced Patricia. Instead, they had given her allies the perfect opportunity to tear their whole corrupt system apart. Sunlight streamed through the tall courthouse windows in the downtown Chicago courthouse, casting long shadows across the packed gallery. Every seat was filled, with people standing along the walls. The air felt thick with tension as David Whitaker approached the podium. His briefcase, heavy with evidence that would shatter carefully constructed lies. Judge Barbara Thompson, a stern woman, looked down from the bench. "Mr. Whitaker, you called this emergency hearing claiming new evidence. Proceed." David Whitaker nodded, setting up a small speaker system. "Your Honor, what you are about to hear was recorded on the day of Judge Reynolds' arrest." Chief Harlan shifted in his seat near the front row. Donnelly and Baxter sat behind their attorney, their usual confidence wavering slightly as they watched David Whitaker connect the audio equipment. The first recording played, Donnelly's voice filling the silent room. "Chief says she has been poking around those seized asset reports." "Time to shut her down." Baxter's response followed. "Everything is arranged. Warrant is ready. Just needs the final touches." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. David Whitaker paused the playback. This conversation took place before Judge Reynolds' arrest. Their claim of responding to an emergency complaint is demonstrably false. The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection. We have no way to verify when this recording was made." "If I may, Your Honor," David Whitaker pulled out a thick folder. "I have here the original metadata and verification from 2 independent audio forensics experts confirming the authenticity." Judge Barbara Thompson reviewed the documents carefully. "Objection overruled. Continue, Mr. Whitaker." David Whitaker played more segments. Each clip revealed deeper layers of premeditation. Donnelly and Baxter discussed forging documents, planting evidence, coordinating with others to alter records. The gallery's whispers grew louder. Officer Donnelly's face had turned red. Baxter stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "But the audio evidence is just the beginning," David Whitaker continued. He projected financial records onto the courtroom screen. "These bank records show regular deposits into offshore accounts, all carefully structured to avoid detection." He highlighted specific transactions. Each deposit corresponds to cases Judge Reynolds was investigating, cases involving seized assets that mysteriously disappeared or were severely undervalued. The defense attorney tried again. "Your Honor, these financial records were not part of the original filing. They became relevant when your client's recorded conversations mentioned seized asset reports," David Whitaker countered, "which led us to discover this pattern of financial irregularities." Judge Barbara Thompson leaned forward. "I will allow it. These documents appear properly authenticated." David Whitaker displayed more evidence: property records, shell company filings, transfer documents with signatures that did not match official records. The web of corruption grew clearer with each exhibit. "The warrant used to arrest Judge Reynolds?" David Whitaker held up the document. "I had our forensics team analyze the paper and ink. It was created on the day of the arrest, but backdated. The authorization code does not exist in the court system." Chief Harlan's calm facade cracked slightly. He whispered urgently to his attorney. David Whitaker played another recording. She should have stayed in her lane, getting too close to the chief's special arrangements. The courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Chief Harlan. "We have also discovered," David Whitaker continued, his voice steady, "that properties seized in drug raids were systematically transferred to companies owned by Chief Harlan's family members through a series of shell corporations." He displayed a complex chart showing the connections. Assets moved through this network. Judge Reynolds began noticing discrepancies in the documentation. She was arrested. The defense attorneys huddled together, papers rustling as they whispered frantically. Donnelly and Baxter avoided looking at each other or their chief. David Whitaker projected one final document. This is the witness statement from Officer Kevin Hayes, claiming he saw Judge Reynolds tampering with evidence. He paused for effect. Officer Kevin Hayes was not employed by the court during the period he claimed to be present. His entire background was fabricated. A gasp ran through the gallery. Judge Barbara Thompson's expression hardened as she studied the proof of perjury. "Your Honor," David Whitaker's voice carried clearly through the stunned courtroom. "These officers did not just falsely arrest a sitting judge. They are part of a larger conspiracy to conceal systematic corruption. Judge Reynolds was targeted because she discovered their scheme." He gestured to the evidence displayed around him. The recordings prove premeditation. The financial records show motive. The forged documents and false witness demonstrate consciousness of guilt. This was not a legitimate arrest. It was a calculated attack on someone who threatened to expose the truth. Chief Harlan stood abruptly, heading for the door. Two federal agents who had been waiting near the entrance stepped forward, blocking his path. The defense attorneys were now openly arguing among themselves. Donnelly's face had gone from red to pale. Baxter stared at his hands, all pretense of confidence gone. Judge Barbara Thompson rapped her gavel sharply. "Order!" The room fell silent again. "Mr. Whitaker, this evidence suggests serious criminal conduct extending well beyond the current matter." "Yes, Your Honor," David Whitaker agreed. "We are prepared to provide all documentation to the federal investigators already waiting outside." The gallery erupted in shocked conversations. The carefully constructed narrative that had painted Judge Reynolds as corrupt was crumbling, revealing the real corruption beneath. Judge Barbara Thompson raised her voice over the noise. "Given the nature of this evidence, I am immediately vacating all charges against Judge Reynolds." Furthermore, she fixed a stern gaze on the officers and their chief. "I'm referring this matter to the U.S. Attorney's Office for immediate investigation." The room buzzed with tension and disbelief. Reporters rushed out to file updates. The officers' supporters, who had filled the front rows at previous hearings, now moved away from them as if distance could provide deniability. The truth that had been buried under layers of lies and intimidation now lay exposed in the harsh light of justice. The courtroom crackled with tension as the final audio recording faded into silence. Judge Barbara Thompson's stern expression had transformed into one of barely contained outrage. Around the room, federal agents positioned themselves strategically near the exits, while court officers exchanged meaningful glances. In light of this overwhelming evidence, Judge Barbara Thompson declared, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, "This court has no choice but to take immediate action." She straightened in her chair, authority radiating from every movement. "Court officers, take Officers Donnelly and Baxter into custody, now." Two uniformed court officers moved swiftly toward the defendant's table. The sharp sound of their footsteps echoed through the chamber as they approached. Donnelly and Baxter sat frozen, their faces draining of color as the reality of their situation crashed down around them. Donnelly suddenly jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous," his voice boomed, too loud, desperate, and hollow. "You cannot just—" "Officer Donnelly," Judge Barbara Thompson cut in, her tone sharp as steel. "You will be silent, or you will be held in contempt. Court officers, proceed." The first officer reached for Donnelly's arm. For a moment, it seemed Donnelly might resist. His muscles tensed, jaw clenched, but the fight drained from him as quickly as it had appeared. His shoulders slumped as cold metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Beside him, Baxter remained seated, his expression carefully blank. His eyes darted around the room, analyzing angles, seeking escape routes, finding none. When the second officer approached him, he stood smoothly, offering his wrists without comment, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his composure. Chief Harlan rose from his seat, adjusting his tie with practiced calm. "Your Honor, if I may address the court?" His polished tone carried none of the desperation visible in the slight sheen of sweat on his forehead. I want to express my shock at these revelations. Had I any knowledge of my officer's actions? Save it, Chief, David Whitaker interrupted, pulling another document from his briefcase. Exhibit, Your Honor. Email correspondence between Chief Harlan and Officer Baxter discussing the Reynolds problem and how to handle it permanently. He held up the paper, sent from the Chief's personal email account. Harlan's practiced smile faltered. That could be referring to anything. You are taking it out of context. The full context is here, Chief, David Whitaker continued, his voice steady. Along with bank records showing transfers from your shell companies to accounts controlled by both officers. Should we discuss those details now, or would you prefer to save that conversation for the federal investigators? The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Several reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks, while others rushed for the doors to file updates. The story was already spreading beyond these walls. Judge Barbara Thompson raised her gavel. Order! The sharp crack silenced the room. Chief Harlan, approach the bench. Harlan moved forward, his usual confident stride reduced to uncertain steps. Two federal agents followed close behind him. Edward Harlan, Judge Barbara Thompson began, using his first name with clear disdain. Based on the evidence presented, you are hereby remanded into federal custody pending investigation into conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice. Your Honor, I have rights, Harlan started. Yes, you do, Judge Barbara Thompson cut him off, and they will be scrupulously observed, unlike how you treated Judge Reynolds' rights. She nodded to the federal agents. Take him. As Harlan was led away, Judge Barbara Thompson turned her attention to the formal dismissal of charges against Patricia. Let the record show that all charges against Judge Patricia Reynolds are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Her voice carried the weight of justice finally served. The record will further reflect that these charges were brought maliciously and without merit as part of a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice. Each dismissed charge seemed to lift a weight from the room. Patricia sat perfectly still, her face a mask of dignified calm as she watched the proceedings. She showed no triumph, no satisfaction, only the patient certainty of someone who had known the truth would eventually surface. The officers who had once dragged her from her own courtroom now shuffled toward the door in restraints, their badges and guns already confiscated. Donnelly stared straight ahead, his previous swagger replaced by rigid shock. Baxter kept his head down, already calculating plea deals in his mind. Chief Harlan walked between two federal agents, his carefully maintained image of authority crumbling with each step. His expensive suit, once a symbol of his power, now looked like costly costume jewelry, flashy but fundamentally fake. The gallery watched in stunned silence as the three men were led out. The same people who had witnessed Patricia's humiliation now observed her vindication. Some looked away in shame, remembering their own silence during her arrest. Others nodded in grim satisfaction, particularly those who had endured similar abuses of power. Through it all, Patricia remained motionless, her hands folded in her lap, her posture straight and dignified. She had maintained her composure through the worst of their attacks, and she maintained it now, in her moment of vindication. The only visible change was a slight softening around her eyes, as she watched justice finally align with truth. Sunlight filtered through the high courthouse windows in the downtown Chicago courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Patricia Reynolds stood outside her courtroom, her judicial robe draped carefully over her arm. The fabric felt different now, heavier with meaning, yet somehow lighter with vindication. She traced her fingers over the nameplate beside the door. Judge Patricia Reynolds, courtroom. They had not had time to remove it during her absence. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy wooden doors. The familiar creak announced her return, drawing every eye in the packed gallery. A profound silence filled the space. Court staff, attorneys, and observers rose in unison, not from mere protocol, but with genuine reverence. David Whitaker sat in the front row of the gallery, his briefcase at his feet. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a subtle nod. She noticed Rachel Bennett at her usual station, her recording equipment ready, her presence a quiet reminder of how truth had prevailed. Patricia moved deliberately toward the bench, each step measured and purposeful. Her shoes clicked against the floor, the same sound that had echoed through this room countless times before. But now it carried new weight. The robe settled onto her shoulders like armor, its black fabric a statement of restored authority. "All rise," the bailiff called out, though everyone was already standing. "The Honorable Judge Patricia Reynolds presiding." She took her seat, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. The leather chair felt unchanged, yet everything else had transformed. The same walls that had witnessed her humiliation now stood witness to her return. "Be seated," she said, her voice clear and steady. The rustling of movement filled the room as people settled into their places. She allowed the moment to breathe, surveying the faces before her. Some showed relief, others embarrassment, and a few displayed lingering uncertainty. "Before we proceed with the docket," Patricia began, "there are matters that must be addressed." She opened a folder on her bench, though she hardly needed to reference its contents. "These events have exposed serious failures within our justice system, failures that extend far beyond my personal experience." Her words carried to every corner of the courtroom. No one shuffled papers or whispered to colleagues. Even the usual background noise of the courthouse seemed muted, as if the building itself was listening. "The corruption we witnessed was not born in a day," she continued. "It grew in the shadows of complacency, fed by silence and fear. That ends now." She lifted a document from her desk. "I am implementing immediate changes to court procedures and oversight mechanisms." David Whitaker leaned forward slightly, his pen poised over his notepad. He recognized the determination in her tone, the same unwavering resolve that had sustained her through her ordeal. "First," Patricia announced, "all warrant applications will undergo multi-level review with mandatory documentation of every individual involved in the process. No single officer, judge, or official will have unilateral power to circumvent these checks." She paused, allowing the significance to settle. Several attorneys in the gallery exchanged glances, recognizing the direct response to how her arrest warrant had been fraudulently processed. "Second, this court will establish an independent oversight committee for law enforcement conduct within our jurisdiction. This committee will include civilian representatives, legal experts, and ethics specialists. Their findings will be public record." The scratch of pens and tap of laptop keys filled the brief silence as people recorded her words. Through the window, clouds shifted, changing the pattern of light across the courtroom floor. "Third, we will implement new protections for court staff who report misconduct." Her eyes moved briefly to Rachel. "Whistleblower safeguards will be strengthened, and anonymous reporting channels will be established with direct access to external investigators." Each directive landed with the weight of stone on water, ripples spreading through the assembled crowd. These were not mere procedural adjustments. They were fundamental shifts in how power would be checked and balanced. "Additionally," Patricia continued, her voice taking on an even more serious tone, "I am ordering a complete review of all cases involving Officers Donnelly and Baxter, as well as any decisions influenced by former Chief Harlan. Justice cannot exist alongside corruption, and we must be willing to examine our own failures." She straightened a stack of papers on her bench, the simple action drawing attention to how ordinary moments could carry extraordinary significance. The same hands that had been cuffed now commanded the full attention of the court. "These changes are not punitive," she explained, her tone measured but firm. "They are protective of our system, our principles, and most importantly, of justice itself." What happened in this courtroom revealed both the worst and the best of our system. We witnessed how power can be abused, but also how truth, when properly defended, will prevail. David Whitaker nodded slowly, pride evident in his expression. He watched as his friend and colleague reclaimed not just her position, but the very principle of justice she had always fought to uphold. "We will now proceed with the cases," Patricia stated, reaching for the first file on her docket. The routine action carried new meaning. Each case would be heard under these new standards, each decision made with renewed commitment to transparency and fairness. The gallery remained still, absorbing the gravity of the moment. Through the windows, the light continued to shift, but within the courtroom, something had solidified, a renewed foundation of justice, stronger for having been tested. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the end, what happened to Judge Patricia Reynolds in that packed Chicago courtroom teaches us one of the most powerful truths about life. Real courage isn't loud or dramatic. It's the quiet decision to stand for what's right even when everyone else stays silent. When two officers dragged her from her own bench in handcuffs, she never broke, never begged, never let fear steal her dignity. She held her head high because she knew that truth, once spoken, has a way of finding its voice again. Her story reminds us that power can be abused, systems can be corrupted, and good people can be knocked down. But none of that can ever erase integrity. The real victory didn't come when the charges were dropped or when the corrupt officials were led away in cuffs. It came the moment she walked back into that courtroom, put on her robe, and chose to keep fighting for justice instead of seeking revenge. That kind of strength changes everything. It shows us that no matter how dark things get, no matter how alone you feel, staying true to your principles will eventually bring the light back. If Patricia Reynolds' story touched something deep inside you, if it reminded you to speak up when it matters most, then do me a favor right now. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one time in your life when standing for the truth changed everything for you? And if you want more powerful, heartfelt stories like this that lift your spirit and challenge your thinking, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for being here. Your support truly means the world.